Hello everyone, welcome to Sunday School Class with Ricky. I am Ricky Williams. Welcome again to those of you who have been with us before. Glad that you've come back. And if you're new to the channel, welcome for the first time, and we trust that you will stay and be with us. We have just started a new series where we are going through the biographies of people who are mentioned in the Bible. But we have limited our scope somewhat, and we are only going to be speaking about persons who are mentioned in the Bible and also mentioned in other non-biblical historical references. So people who have been pretty much agreed universally to be actual, real historical characters because they are mentioned in multiple sources other than the Bible. So that's what we're doing as we go through these biographies. We trust that you will find them interesting. Today, we are doing the biography of a person who is quite enigmatic and interesting. This is the prophet found in the Old Testament by the name of Balaam. Now, you might hear his name pronounced in a number of different ways. You might hear Balaam or something else. For this video, we will stick with what I think is the more familiar Balaam. And we'll talk a bit about him, quite a character as found in the Old Testament, but mentioned several times throughout the Bible, including the New Testament. Unfortunately, always mentioned in a negative way. So today, we'll talk about Balaam. And as we do so, let's study together. Who was this man Balaam? And the reason I said he was enigmatic or even very interesting, he is a prophet mentioned in the Old Testament. He is a prophet, but he is not an Israelite. He's a prophet from the Gentile nations. He is considered to be someone who is a well-known diviner or seer, someone who believed to have had power to bless or to curse. He is born in a place called Pethor, which was near the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia. We see that in Numbers 22 and verse 5. And he had quite a reputation, apparently. So it seemed as though he was quite famous in that region, and he was sought after by kings for his spiritual influence. So Balaam fits the role of what was known at the time as a Mesopotamian diviner. He practiced what is called omen reading, and these persons were often employed by kings. In 1967, some archaeologists were digging, as archaeologists do, in a place called Deir Allah in present-day Jordan. This excavation revealed a multiple chamber structure that was apparently destroyed by an earthquake, supposedly during the Persian period. That's a bit of a guess there, not quite sure. But this multi-room complex probably served some kind of religious or cultic purpose. There was an inscription written on the wall of one of the rooms, and this inscription contains a story relating to the visions of Balaam, the son of Beor, a seer of the gods. And this inscription is referred to as the Deir Allah inscription, or nowadays as the Balaam inscription. The inscription itself is written in a peculiar Northwest Semitic dialect. And I'm sure many of you don't know what that is. Neither do I. It's just one of those things that we encounter. It's a weird dialect. But the inscription mentions Balaam, son of Beor, specifically by name. It describes him as a seer of the gods who received visions by night. And it portrays Balaam as a figure of great renown and spiritual authority. The first complete translation and reconstruction of this inscription was published in 1981. Today, it has been translated into modern Hebrew letters, and it's available online. You could go and have a read. But the text is difficult to read and difficult to interpret because, of course, of the time that has passed and the nature of the inscription and the language in which it was originally written in. But the experts have looked at it And here is a sample reconstruction and translation of the first few sentences. Here's what it says. This is the book of Balaam, son of Beor, a seer of the gods. To him came the gods at night, and they spoke to him according to the utterance of El. And they spoke to Balaam, son of Beor, thus. And it goes on. We won't read the whole thing, but the key thing here is that this inscription, found in a secular place, mentions specifically Balaam, the son of Beor, who is also mentioned in the Bible. For your interest, this inscription, the Del Alar inscription, is currently held at the Jordan Archaeological Museum in Amman. And it confirms to us that Balaam was remembered outside of the Israelite tradition as a real historical person. So in the Bible, we are introduced to Balaam in the book of Numbers chapter 22. And the incident that where we first meet him is occurring during the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt and into the promised land. And we come upon Balaam just after Israel has defeated the king of the Amorites and the king of Bashan. So Israel is on their way again into the promised land, and at this point of the story, in this point of the exodus, they have pitched in the plains of Moab. Balak was the king of the Moabites at this time, and he saw Israel. He saw them dwelling in the plain, and he saw their great number. And he had also heard what they did to the Amorites. So Balak was afraid of Israel, and he wanted to do whatever he could to get rid of them so that they wouldn't do to him what they did to the Amorites. And so Balak sent for Balaam, the son of Beor. As we mentioned earlier, this seemed to have been a common practice of those kings, where they would send for diviners or seers to help them curse their enemies, or bless their own people, and so on. So Balak does this. He sent for Balaam, the son of Beor. And he did so because he wanted Balaam to curse the Israelites, so of course that he could defeat them and drive them out. So this kind of tells us about the reputation of Balaam, because Balak himself said, "Who Balaam blesses is blessed, and he who he curses is cursed." So that seems to have been the general reputation of Balaam at that time. And this seems to suggest that it was well known to the people in that area that Balaam was kind of a prophet for hire. And so the story goes on. Balaam, messengers are sent to Balaam from Balak with an offer of money and a proposal from Balak. So they come to Balaam with this offer and with this money. Now, it is at this point that you and I may have expected Balaam to respond, to say something like, "No, I am not going to accept any money for doing God's work. I reject it altogether," or something along those lines. But that's not quite what happened. Balaam tells them to hold on, wait overnight. He's going to speak to God and see what God speaks to him and what God tells him to do. And then in the morning, he will tell them what God said. So the men agreed, and the men decided that they will stay overnight with Balaam. So surprisingly, at least to me, God does indeed speak to Balaam. And God tells him, do not go out with the men, and certainly do not curse Israel. So the next morning, Balaam gets up and correctly reports to the men what God had said to him, that he was not to go with them, he was not to curse Israel, and therefore, gentlemen, could you please kindly leave? And the men do so. They leave. They return to Balak and report to him and update him on what Balaam has said. Balak obviously was not a man to be easily deterred, so he sent back a second delegation, this time with more senior officials, men who are more prominent, and he makes the proposal to Balaam again. This time, there was a promise included of great promotion and reward for Balaam if he agrees. Again, Balaam's initial response was a correct response. And he says to Balak, well, says to the messengers, the contingent, the delegation, he says to them, no amount of money can persuade him to go against the word of God. Very good answer. That was the right thing to say. But then he seems to relent a little bit and says to the men, okay, look, hold on again, spend the night again, and let me go and talk to God again and see what God says. Of course, God had already told him what to do. God had already given him the answer. But here's Balaam kind of relenting a little bit in his position and saying to the guys, hold on, let me go and ask God again. And now this really should not have been necessary because, as I said, God had already given him the answer. However, Balaam goes to bed that night, I guess, speaks to God, and again, surprisingly, God does speak with him again. And God tells Balaam, all right, you can go with the men, but only do what I tell you to do. That's what God tells Balaam. So Balaam gets up in the morning, saddles his donkey, and goes with the men. So at this point in the story, it starts to get a bit interesting, confusing, because the story takes a few unexpected twists. So we had just seen that God said to Balaam just before, go with the men, but say only what I tell you to say. But here now we're told, as Balaam leaves to go with the men, that God is angry with him because he is going with the men. So from what we read earlier, God had explicitly told Balaam to go with the men. So there's clearly something else going on here that is not made explicitly clear to us. And I suspect that it has to do with Balaam's attitude or his true motives for going, which of course God knew. Nevertheless, it is at this point of the story that we encounter the situation for which Balaam is most famous. Because Balaam is riding along on his donkey with two servants accompanying him. I'm not sure where the messengers from Balak were at this point. Maybe they had gone on ahead or something, but they're not mentioned in this part of the story. But we're told that the angel of the Lord stood in the road as an adversary against Balaam, with his sword drawn, presumably to slay Balaam. And so the story goes that the donkey on which Balaam was riding saw the angel and tries to take evasive action to take Balaam out of the way to protect his own life, to protect him from the angel. Balaam does not see the angel. So when the donkey goes in directions contrary to where he wants her to go, he keeps getting angrier and angrier, even striking the donkey repeatedly with his own staff. Eventually, the donkey simply drops down under Balaam and refuses to move. Balaam is now extremely angry and strikes the donkey again with his staff. It is at this point that the story gets even weirder, because the donkey begins to speak to Balaam, asking him why he was striking her. And even weirder still, Balaam responds to the donkey and has a conversation with her as though this is the most normal and natural thing in the world. Anyway, eventually, Balaam gets the message that the donkey was trying to save his life. His eyes are eventually opened and he sees the angel standing in the way. And the angel rebukes him, citing the fact that his ways, his attitude, his motives were perverse in the sight of God. Balaam, to his credit, immediately repents and offers to just turn around and return to his home. But again, maybe a bit confusingly, the angel repeats what God said to him before, to go with the men, but only say what I tell you to say. So, after all of that, Balaam gets up and continues along with the men and finally meets up with Balak. So yeah, this story has quite a number of unexpected twists. Okay, so now Balaam and Balak are together finally, and for the next passage of scripture we go through what are known as the oracles of Balaam. In other words, the pronouncements he makes after speaking, after being instructed by God as to what to say, and there are 4 of them. So we're going to go through the oracles of Balaam at this time. The first oracle is found in Numbers 22 verses 41 to 23 verse 12. And at this point, Balak takes Balaam up to a high place called Bamoth Baal so that he could see the people of Israel. And of course, the reason for that was that Balak wanted Balaam to see Israel so that he could pronounce his curse upon them. So Balak goes and he actually seeks God's guidance as to what to say at this point. And God actually does respond and speaks directly to Balaam and tells him what to say. And basically God tells him to bless Israel. And Balaam obeys God and goes ahead and blesses Israel rather than curse them. Balak, of course, is quite upset by this. As I said before, Balak was not a man to be easily discouraged apparently, so he takes Balaam to a second point, and this is where we get the second oracle of Balaam, found in Numbers 23 from verse 13 to verse 27. So Balak took him to a place called the field of Zophim, to the top of Pisgah. And again, he does that so Balaam could go ahead and do what he was hired to do and pronounce a curse on Israel. Again, Balaam seeks God's direction, and again God meets with Balaam and speaks to him directly and puts a word into his mouth. Very well known quotation at this point comes from God. It says, God is not a human being that he should lie, or a mortal that he should change his mind. That's what God says, because Balak persisting in making these offers isn't going to make God change his mind. He's going to continue to bless Israel. So anyway, that's where we get that quote from. And so once again, Balaam obeys what God says and pronounces another blessing from God on Israel. And he uses this wonderful verse, surely there is no enchantment against Jacob, no divination against Israel. So nothing against Israel, it is only blessing. Balak, of course, is even more upset because this is now the second time he has asked Balaam to pronounce a curse, and the second time that Balaam has pronounced a blessing. And so, again, not being deterred, Balak takes Balaam to a third place, takes him to the top of Peor. And this is where we get the third oracle from Balaam, found in Numbers 23:28 to 24:14. This time, Balaam, quite rightly, doesn't even seem to seek after any sign or omen from God, because he knows what God is going to say. He realizes that God is only blessing Israel. But we're told here that the Spirit of God comes upon Balaam, and so he gives his third oracle, again pronouncing a blessing on Israel. Balak is now really pulling out his hair in anger, and he is now done with this, done with Balaam altogether. Balaam is wasting his time, so he sends Balaam away angrily without any payment. And so sometimes when you are working for a person, and maybe you don't get along very well, and you decide to end your employment either by resignation, or you got fired or something, but you have now ended your employment with the person, and you feel that you are not at liberty to say and to tell your ex-employer how you really feel. That happens, right? By the way, don't ever do that, all right? Just keep your thoughts to yourself. But that's how it was with Balaam at this point. He is no longer working for Balak. He's no longer under any obligation to Balak. So he feels free to speak his mind. And so he gives a fourth oracle without even being asked for one. He is now given an oracle free of charge to Balak because he can now say exactly what he wants to say. And it is in this fourth oracle that we get that well-known prophecy from Balaam, reading from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. It says there in verse 17 of chapter 24, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the foreheads of Moab and the heads of all the Shethites. Now that prophecy probably was initially about David, but ultimately it was to be fulfilled by the Messiah, the Lord Jesus Christ. And that wonderful prophecy came from Balaam's fourth oracle as he was speaking to Balak. So now, having done that, having delivered his fourth oracle, Balaam and Balak go their separate ways, and we're told that Balaam returns to his home. In Numbers 31, God instructs Israel to go to battle against Midian, to avenge an earlier act that was committed by the Midianites in Numbers 25. During that battle, we are told of the persons who were slain by Israel. In verse 7 of Numbers 31, it says there, they did battle, they of course there being Israel, they did battle against Midian as the Lord had commanded Moses, and killed every male. They killed the kings of Midian, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian, in addition to others who were slain by them. And they also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. This battle is also recounted in Joshua 13, where Balaam is said to have practiced divination. In verse 22 of chapter 13, it says, along with the rest of those they put to death, the Israelites also put to the sword Balaam, son of Beor, who practiced divination. And so Balaam dies at the hands of the Israelite armies sometime in the 12th or 13th century BC. There are some other references to Balaam found throughout the Bible. As I said in my earlier introduction, unfortunately, most of these references are of a negative tone towards Balaam. Micah 6 and verse 5 is a more neutral reference. It's just a reminder to Israel of God's deliverance despite the attempts of Balak and Balaam's response to him. However, as we read other references, particularly in the New Testament, 2 Peter 2:15, Jude 11, and Revelation 2:14, Balaam is portrayed as a symbol of greed, false teaching, and someone who led others into sin. Interestingly, Balaam is also mentioned by the Jewish historian Josephus in his Antiquities writing. And again, also, Josephus references him as being a greedy, false teaching person and one who led others into sin as well. So what is Balaam's legacy? Balaam, we will easily note, is not a false prophet, but perhaps he was a corrupted one. Note that in every case, Balaam did what God said to do, and he said what God told him to say. Now that has to be commended of Balaam. Note also that God continued to speak to him and continued to use him to convey his messages. Despite his intentions, God used Balaam to bless Israel and even to deliver that wonderful messianic prophecy. But we are told that Balaam was motivated by greed. Perhaps there are some other aspects of the story that we are not really privy to, but the conclusion of Balaam was that he was a person who was out to get money. He was a greedy person. And his attitude and his motivation were clearly the problem with him. Just to remember, spiritual gifts without obedience often lead to destruction. And true faith requires loyalty to God above any personal ambition. As we conclude today, what is today's Sunday school lesson? As we just mentioned about Balaam, he has some very commendable qualities. As we said, he obeyed God. He did what God told him to do, and as a prophet, he said what God told him to say. He wasn't a false prophet. So he, on the surface, you can look at Balaam's life and say, well, he's all right. He did some good things. He did the right things. But clearly, Balaam had some wrong motives. And it would appear his motives were to get money, to get rich, to use the fact that God spoke to him, to use that to promote himself, to get wealthy in this world. And that is a reminder to us that we should always be careful to watch our motives. Many of us do things which appear to be good on the surface. We appear to be serving God. We appear to be speaking His word. We appear to be trying to help others. But what is our real motive at times? Is it to get personal glory? Is it to get the praise of men? Is it to get money some way? We need to watch our motives, because we could end up like Balaam, doing apparently what seems to be good, but doing it the wrong way, for the wrong reasons, and ending up with a bad reputation. Let's watch our motives as we serve God, and make sure that we are serving God with humility, with love for Him, with obedience to Him, and with a desire to be used by Him to help other people. Those should be our motives. And may we seek to always be mindful of why we are doing things for God, as we said, why we are doing the things that we do. I want to encourage you as a Christian to continue to serve God, do great things for Him, but do them with the right motives. And as I always end with an appeal, if you're not a Christian, trust in the Lord Jesus. He is the one who will guide you. He will give you the right heart, the right motives, the right attitude, so that you can serve Him, serve God with sincerity. I trust that this study on Balaam has been a blessing to you. It will help you in some way. Join us again for our next class. As always, we ask that if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel. If you have not done so already, share the video, and so we can spread these videos as much as possible. And we'll see you in our next class. Until then, may God bless you.